Okay, so I'm sure it's not all rosy. I mean, the 6,000 sound wonderful. Who wouldn't love that $6,000 cash flow today? But tell us about your nightmare moments, because I'm sure you have them too.
Yeah, for sure you have nightmare moments in real estate. And there's so many too, from nightmares that you have during the rehab phase where the city will red tag you because you haven't pulled the right permit. And you've got to go through and get that resolved. And then there's the nightmare of the bad guests, which, in my 7 years of doing short-term rentals, I've only had one true nightmare guest that really wrecked the place. Unfortunately, Airbnb has something called air cover, which they will fully reimburse you for any damages that guests do. So it's a great feature for hosts that use Airbnb. A lot of people talk about, well, Airbnb takes a percentage and things like that. It's a pretty small percentage for hosts. It's only 3%, but it protects you in the event that there really is a nightmare guest. So I've had my one experience with a super bad guest, but then you're in the hospitality industry, and with that comes your more difficult guests. You have guests that will send you a message saying, "This is the most comfortable bed I've ever slept in. Can you tell me where you bought this mattress from?" And that same Airbnb, you'll have a guest tell you, "This was the worst bed I've ever slept in. The mattress was so hard and I hated it," right? So you can't make everybody happy, and you just try to do your best to be the best customer service advocate that you can be. Fortunately for me, I'm not always great with that. Sometimes I have a hard time holding my tongue, but my portfolio is big enough, and I also manage other people's properties, that I have two awesome assistants that do my property management for me. So they get to put on a smiling face, and they get to deal with the guest questions and respond as politely as possible whenever they're, being unreasonable. And I don't have to deal with that anymore. But, it's the hospitality industry. There's definitely more work than a traditional long-term rental. But what I always tell people is it's absolutely worth it. The $6,000 a month that I make versus the $1,800 a month that I would have made as a long-term rental, for me, it's worth it to pursue and keep it operating it as a short term. Not to mention the fact that forced appreciation that you get when I sold the property for $1.2 million was put a real smile on my face that day as well.
Well, I hope you have tax strategy in place where you didn't have to pay tax on that 1.2. And if you don't, you can always donate to the V Foundation if you need some tax write-off.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay, so if you were to look and analyze a property today to convert to your short-term rental, what are you looking at, and what would be a no deal, like a deal breaker for you?
Yeah. The number one thing I'm looking at is, what is my out-of-pocket investment on this property going to be? People don't understand the concept of good deal, bad deal, and for me, it should be all about how much resources you have and what kind of return is this property going to get you, and does that align with your goals? So, if you have $100,000 in the bank and you put all that investing it in a property that only makes you a couple $100 a month, well, then that's a bad investment, because it didn't get you to your goals and you've used up all the savings that you've had. So I'm always looking at, what is my out-of-pocket investment going to be on this property, and what's the return? If I am going to be out of pocket $55,000 on the property, but it's going to make me $6,000 a month, like the example that I gave you for my first Airbnb, I'm okay with that, getting my money back in 10 months, right? I'm even okay with having $200,000 invested in a property if it's going to make me $20,000 a month in profit, which is what my 16-unit Airbnb does for me. We haven't even talked about the 16-unit one, but I have a 16-unit property that I've made all short-term rentals, So it's really about out-of-pocket versus return on investment. And that's the number one thing that I look at. The number two thing I look at would be just uniqueness and cool factor of the property. Does it have tall ceilings? Is it in a great location? It's something that I can do with this property to really make it stand out and be unique, that is going to attract more guests, or allow me to charge a higher rate, or charge maybe an event fee because it's set up nicely for events. So I look at ways that I can turn it into a super cool property, like I did with my mechanic shop that I bought and converted into a short-term rental, 4 short-term rentals. Ultimately, I had somebody reach out to me from a famous Houston rapper, and they asked if they could shoot a music video in one of my short-term rentals. So I actually have one of my Airbnbs was in a music rap video, and it's a cool thing to be able to kind of feature and kind of confirmation that I'm doing things the right way as far as making cool, unique properties that people are excited about staying in.
Okay. So not all of us are creative. How do you go about like finding what people want? Because that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think there's a few ways of doing that. I'm not super creative either, but it goes back to having a great team. I have an awesome interior designer on my team. I have a great architect on my team who helps me redesign my properties and reconfigure them to really maximize the best use of the space. I personally like to put myself in the guest shoes, right? I think that's something so easy and so simple to do is think about like, what would be a cool experience for you? And what would you really like? Would you find it cool to stay in one of these geodomes on the lake or in a tiny home or a cabin? Think about the really cool experiences that you would enjoy and the types of amenities or features you'd want them to have there, and put yourself in your guest shoes to help you kind of come up with the ideas that potentially could be, great short-term rentals.
This episode is brought to you by National Real Estate Insurance Group, a national independent insurance agency specifically for real estate investors. I personally use NREIG for my investment properties. They offer a low monthly payment option to help you to lower your cash out of pocket when buying an investment property. If you're looking for insurance coverage for your flips or your rental, reach out to them. You can click on the link in the show descriptions, or you can reach out to Jules at 816-946-8443.